up.
Okay.
Okay, 3, 2, 1.
Hello. Welcome in. Hi, Ari. Hi, Natalie.
Hi, Ariana. Hi, Natalie.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome, everybody. Welcome in, and thank you so much for joining today's webinar, Zingerman's Perpetual Purpose Trust, a radical model for succession planning. My name is Ariana. I am a Zing Train trainer and resident interviewer. I will be your host today, and I'm thrilled to be here alongside Natalie Reitman-White and Ari Weinzweig. Natalie is the expert who helped Zingerman's establish our Perpetual Purpose Trust. She works with organizations to ensure that a company's missions, values, way of doing business are preserved into the future. And Ari, of course, is co-founding partner of Zingerman's community of businesses, who's here to share his story of doing this work, of preserving Zingerman's purpose and legacy for generations to come. We also have with us Katie Alexander, our community builder here at ZingTrain. She's here behind the scenes, moderating the chat and the questions with me. And we are coming to you live from Ann Arbor, Michigan. We'd love to hear where you are tuning in from. So if you want to open up the chat, hello. You can jump in and drop in your location. So if you click on the chat button, you can put it in there. If you see any neighbors around, be sure to say hi. We are going to dive into the good stuff really soon, but before we do that, I have 3 helpful tips to make our time together feel really good. The first one, as far as the format of the webinar, I will be interviewing Natalie and Ari, but you will also have a chance to ask your questions. As you listen, you can submit your questions by clicking on the Q&A button, Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And at the end, I will read those questions out loud to Natalie and Ari. We will do our very best to get to as many questions as you can, but if we were to not answer your question, look for resources in our follow-up email. You'll receive that follow-up email tomorrow-ish, by the end of tomorrow. And if you have any questions right now, right as we start the webinar, you are welcome to click on the Q&A button there and send them on over. The second helpful tip, there is closed captioning available. Katie's going to drop those details and get that going. You can find the closed captioning button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And the third item in business, we are recording this conversation and we'll be sending it out to all of you by the end of tomorrow in that follow-up email. It will also live on our website, zingtrade.com, along with all of our other webinars and free resources. So 3 orders of business, and I'm really excited to get to start asking you all questions. So welcome, Ari, welcome, Natalie. We're so excited to have you here to talk succession planning and Perpetual Purpose Trust. So my first question of the day is for Natalie. Natalie, what inspired you to get into this work of ownership and governance?
Thanks, Ariana. So I started, I guess, my career as an activist in college, working on environmental and social justice issues. And, at the time I was kind of protesting corporations and what they were doing in communities. And then I met a group of people working in business who were doing it differently, who were really trying to have a positive impact on their communities through their business. And that group of people was that organically grown company. And their whole mission of their business was helping people eat healthier food. And the way they did that was by helping the farmers make a living growing healthier food. So they worked early on organic growing methods and how to distribute that food to the community. And so I was very inspired by, this is a model of business that was making the change that I wanted to see in the world, which seemed pretty productive versus just kind of protesting against what we don't like. And I started working with them nearly 20 years ago and learned a lot working alongside the founders. And through that work, I met a lot of entrepreneurs in the organic and natural foods industry. Many of them were, growing their businesses, had similar ethos around, community benefit. And it was a hot industry. It was experiencing rapid growth. And so when I was there, we went from 100 employees to 300 employees, and many of these businesses were growing very rapidly. And one of the things I found out over time is how businesses are owned matters for the long term. Ownership denotes who has the decision-making power and where the economic benefits go. And one of the things that I found was that businesses during this kind of growth of the organic trade would sometimes take on investors and not necessarily talk about the long-term vision for where the business was headed ownership-wise. And I saw founders, some of my peers in the trade, lose control. So, all of a sudden, production was being moved out of where they were founded. Maybe the formulations of their products were changing. Maybe they were even getting away from their historic supplier relationships and relationships that they had built over many years. So it's not that, people are bad people coming in and investing in businesses, but oftentimes in industries that are hot, there's more and more consolidation, and ownership gets further and further away from the people who are doing the work and have those relationships with the employees, with the customers, with the supply chains, and it becomes easier to start to just look at numbers and not, that ecosystem of relationships that you've built. So I was really curious about how we have successful businesses that grow, but stay rooted in their values of why they were started, and that benefit the multiple stakeholders in those businesses. And so I started looking at alternative models, ownership models that would keep companies independent, community rooted, and benefiting the multiple stakeholders who are bringing capital to the table. So, investors are an important part of the relationship. They bring financial capital, but we've got human capital in businesses for the people bringing their creativity and life's energy every day. We've got community capital of, the communities in which we operate, and we've even got, environmental capital that we also have to care for and steward for. So really thinking about a business as, it's this engine for driving value, and how do we keep that engine continuing to drive value for multiple folks. So that's what got me into this crazy topic of ownership and finance, and why I'm so passionate about working on it today, because if it gets misaligned, your business can, quickly change.
Yeah, that's really, really fortunate for us, because on the Zingerman side, Ari, I'd like you to talk a little bit more of business as a tool to do good, this ecology, this community of Zingermans, and how Zingermans came up from the other side of it is like, here's our business. How did you get to this perpetual purpose trust and working with Natalie?
There was a lot of questions in one.
That's a lot of questions.
Well, it's 42 years. Well, actually 41, because we formally rolled it out a year ago this week. Actually, this is the 1-year anniversary, Natalie, of our trust. So how did we get to the trust? Probably 15 years ago. So we were already a good 25 plus years in business. One day, Paul Saginaw, my partner, started to ask me what was going to happen when the second one of us passed away. So to back up for those who are in ownership, which looking over the list is a lot of you, we had, and Ariana, if something doesn't make sense, please ask, but we had buyout insurance on each other's lives in order to allow the one who didn't die to purchase the shares from the heirs of the one who did. And fortunately, neither of us has died, so it never went into play. But if I were to have passed away, then the money would go to Paul, who would buy out my heirs so that he wouldn't be working with my heirs, or vice versa. And what he was asking me is what happens when the second one dies. And I kept saying, well, we have the insurance, like whatever it was. No, it's not about the money. Who owns the shares? And I had no idea, and he had no idea. And that started years of conversation and trying to figure out what to do. We looked at all the models that everybody has looked at. There aren't actually that many, but one day, I don't know when, 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, I was probably more than that even. I was reading E.F. Schumacher's book, Small is Beautiful, which just had its 50th anniversary last year. It's from 1973. And it's a wonderful book for many reasons. And although it's not the main point of the book, somewhere in there about halfway through, Schumacher talks about the Scott Bader Commonwealth in England. And what they had done was something that I thought was awesome, which is Mr. Bader started the business in the 20s, but by the 1950s, they were doing quite well. And he wanted to essentially do what I had thought we could do too, but there was no legal construct that we had ever heard of that allowed it, which is essentially for the company to own itself, and the benefit to go to the people who work there. And what that allowed, I thought, would do is what Natalie was trying to avoid having happen in a good way. She was trying to avoid the companies getting sold, and ownership, as she said, moving, and power and profit moving further and further from the place of business and the people who worked in it. And what this did was the other way. It allowed it to stay, the power in the business, the profit go to the people who are working in the business. And it was, they called it a Commonwealth. Now we know it as a perpetual purpose trust. And so I started asking questions about how we could make that happen here. The e-news that I do this week is about non-conformance. And in essence, this was an act of non-conformance because it didn't fit with the usual plans for succession, which would be typically selling the business to an outsider, leaving it to an heir within the business, going public, or maybe on a more radical end, doing an ESOP or an employee stock ownership plan. But none of those appealed, and this did. And so I started asking, meeting with eye rolls, resistance, crazy looks, etc. And I just, in a good way, kept poking around. And one day, Maggie Bayless from Zing, who Ariana, you know very well, called me and she said, I think I found somebody who actually knows about this. And I was like, awesome. So I called him, and he was working with Organic Valley. And he sent me to the people Natalie worked with at Organically Grown out in Portland. And so after a couple conversations there, we ended up with Natalie and her peers, and because they had the expertise of how to actually pull this off. So that's how we got going on it.
I do love that it's radical. And I know that a really common question is, why not an ESOP? Doesn't ESOP, being able to give the business to the employees, that sounds really good. And why is this just a little bit different, or a lot different?
You want me to try that one, or Natalie?
I want both of you. So Ari, I'd like to hear from your side, and then also
Well,
Natalie.
I am not an expert. I'm just a line cook. So it's over my head in a sense, but I never loved it. It seemed like a lot of legal compliance burden that didn't seem that aligned with the way we were trying to work. And then as I learned more about it, and I understood that the ESOP sounded good, but then the ESOP could be sold, which defeated a lot of the purpose for us, which was to keep Zingermans in the community. And so if the ESOP, as and Natalie knows more than I do, so she'll chime in, but if the ESOP gets sold, it benefits the employees who own shares at that time. But then you just end up one step removed from just selling it outright to somebody right from the get-go. So this way, with the Perpetual Purpose Trust, as we understand it and are working with it, it keeps Zingerman's in the community so that it can't be sold. And that, yes, benefit will accrue to the people who work here, but more slowly over time, in what I would suggest is a more natural and sustainable way, rather than a big windfall and everything goes away. Natalie?
Yeah. Well, the company I was working with, Organically Grown Company, was actually about 50% ESOP at the time. And our plan had been to go to 100% ESOP. And we chose to actually buy out the ESOP and move to a Perpetual Purpose Trust. And we did that for a few reasons. I was actually the plan administrator of the ESOP, so I kind of saw the ins and outs of the plan. One of the main reasons was what Ari had said, is that we were interested in the company staying independent and self-governed, and we didn't want it potentially being sold down the line. And there's a fiduciary duty of plan administrators in an ESOP to consider a sale if it's very lucrative for the employee's stock retirement. And so there are situations where ESOPs have sold. Also, we found the plan to be really expensive and complicated to administer. So we were a growing company, a lot of young people joining our workforce, and it's really an employee stock retirement plan. So the goal is that you're rewarded in an ESOP when you retire and leave the company, you get the value of the stock. So it's really a reward upon exit. And we had a lot of young people where they were feeling like that seemed like a long time away, and they'd rather just be more motivated to share in the profits each year and feel the real-time performance reflected in their contribution, and kind of the thought about something for the long term wasn't as meaningful to folks. And people can still take their profits and invest in something for the long term if they want. It's just not in the company itself. The other thing that we experienced was actually kind of a paradigm shift. And, this resonates with some people, not with everyone, but, we kind of felt like, okay, originally we had formed as a farmer cooperative, and it was like farmers are at the center of the universe. They're the ones who have all the decision-making power and get all the economic benefit. And the employees went, well, wait a second, we're part of creating the value too. Shouldn't we be co-owners and get to have a share in the decision-making and share in the benefit? And then, over time, investors want to potentially join, and we'd always said no, because we didn't want investors to be at the center of the universe. Hey, we get to make all the decisions, and we get to reap all the benefit. And so for us, we were looking for something that was a bit of a paradigm shift, which is to say, you know what, the purpose is at the center of the universe. We exist to carry out our company through our products and services, our mission, which is to provide great, healthy food to the communities and help the farmers make a living. And so we want to put the purpose at the center of the universe and say, none of you can take this over and say it's mine for my own personal benefit. But while you participate, you get to share in the governance of ensuring it stays on track to the purpose. And then you get to mutually share in the value that's created as we go. So we actually have it where the employees, the farmers, we do have some investors, and the community share in that. So for us, it was more of a paradigm shift around thinking about that the business is not a commodity and not personal property of anyone, but is a living thing that should reward those who contribute while they're active in a sustainable way. As Ari's saying, if you make the money, you get it in the bank and you can share it, but we're not speculating that it's maybe worth more than it is or it isn't, and leaving it to the next people to kind of pay the bills.
Yeah, Ari, I was wondering if you could elaborate more on that. You had mentioned having the windfall of money coming into a company and having the perpetual purpose trust be much more sustainable. Can you share a little bit more about how you think of that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And again, I'm coming at it as the layperson. Natalie has the technical expertise and has studied it far more in depth than me. But when a company gets sold, and many of my friends have sold their companies, so I'm not trying to be negative about it, there's a lot of money comes in. And as Natalie just said, it's based a lot on the speculative increase in value that the purchaser believes is going to happen. So there's a big windfall. Like if you own shares in a company that got sold, I mean, I don't know, we read articles in the news, that somebody was working at Google when it went public, and all of a sudden they had all this money, et cetera. And again, I'm not criticizing that, but it wasn't really the point of what we were trying to do, was not to make a one-time wealth for a particular group of people, but more to keep Zingerman's community of businesses in the community, as Natalie just alluded to as well, and to keep the power and the profit mostly focused within the business and not have it move further and further afield. Because what ends up happening is we get the if you did an ESOP and now it got sold to somebody else, and then they sell it to somebody else, and all of a sudden you have somebody halfway around the world deciding what which coffee should get served. And the person working the counter has no, they saw the owner on TV on a screen once, but they have no idea who's who. It just seems like it loses a lot of what was so important to us, which was the rooting literally and metaphorically in the community, and the contribution to the community that we're in, not the contribution to somebody else's community halfway around the world. So for me, for us, that was a big driver.
Ariana, I'll add that with a perpetual purpose trust, some people also refer to them as just an employee ownership trust, but it's the same thing. Basically, you're putting the ownership of the company into a trust that will never sell it, and there are no human beneficiaries. You say the purpose is to hold the company to continue to have it operate into perpetuity, and nobody can take this asset out of the trust so long as it continues to operate. But you can just make the purpose about running a great company and having the employees share in all the governance and all the rewards. And some people refer to that style of perpetual purpose trust as just an employee ownership trust. But it's, again, the employees don't own stock. The trust holds all the stock. In many ways, it's simple because you've created an owner who will never retire, never need liquidity or an exit from the company, and never die because it's perpetual. So you've got an owner now that's a permanent owner. So you never have to deal with that change again. And it's a trust that doesn't need any income. So all the income the company makes can just be kept in the company and shared with the employees as you go. So that style of perpetual purpose trust, where you focus on governance and benefits for the employees, people are now referring to it as an employee ownership trust. But in the United States, it's using the perpetual purpose trust model or vehicle legally. So it's actually similar to, I saw some of our folks have joined from the UK. So in the UK, they have the stock ownership plans like ESOPs, but they also have what they call employee ownership trusts, which are essentially this. The PPT is just the American legal form.
And then a further question for you, Natalie, is since this is really radical, what's it like to work with a company or a founder or a couple of founders? So you can use Zingerman's as an example or another example. What's it like to kind of transfer from the current owners into this idea of this perpetual owner doing this work?
Yeah. Well, it's been just really heartening, the companies that I've gotten to work with from all over the spectrum. So I've worked with a number of food companies because that's the industry that I came out of, but now I've worked with a science education company. I've worked with a socially responsible investment company, craft manufacturing, exercise equipment, landscaping. There's all sorts of companies that I'm finding where business owners, maybe they started their business to make a living, but over time they started to really care about their employees, care about their supply chains, care about their customers, get really passionate about what they do. And so there are thousands and thousands of business owners who are thinking about succession, thinking about how they keep the impact going as they retire or exit from their businesses and looking for solutions. And what's cool about these trusts is really getting to work with a business owner on designing it unique to their circumstance. So I've worked with businesses that are 16 employees and 1,000 employees. And you can design these trusts because they're basically, you're simplifying ownership. Over time, you move to having one main owner that's a trust that'll never go away. And then you get to think about, what is the purpose that you want this business to continue to benefit over time through its operations? Is it your cult? What are the aspects of your culture, your employees, your benefits, maybe your product and service mix that you want to ensure endure? And you can actually write that into a trust agreement. So I've had some businesses say, you know what, we're fine with this business evolving its product and service mix so long as we're always doing manufacturing here locally in Vermont. And they just want to make sure that they always have that commitment to local community. But they understand 50 years from now, they might be doing different things with their businesses, so long as it stays in that community. I've had others that say, you know what, for us, it's really about ensuring craft manufacturing stays alive in America. And they make home goods. And a lot of this has been, kind of outsourced to larger and larger corporations where it's less about craft and more about commodities. And so that business, they said, we're okay with this business maybe moving and expanding in different regions of the US so long as we're still using craft producers who know their stuff, who make stuff by hand, and source locally. So there's all sorts of purposes that people are passionate about ensuring endure in their business. And so it's a matter of working with those business owners to say, what are the things that you want to ensure stay into the future, that you continue to benefit? How do we write that into your trust? And then designing the governance around that. So you have a group of people who have demonstrated their capacity to lead the business, to deliver those results. And then also talking with them about how they want to, divide up the returns over time, because most founders, they want to get some value out. They've created value in the business, so they want to get some retirement and nest egg out of the business. But after they're paid for, you've basically done paying for ownership, and you can use the free cash flows to reward people working in the business. So really thinking about, what that looks like. Is it just the employees? Some people set up charitable trusts, or even in Patagonia's example, they've decided to put 98% of excess profits towards climate change mitigation through a nonprofit using one of these purpose trusts. So they're really bespoke to the business and what the purpose is and who they want to govern it and who they want to benefit over time.
So really preserving craft businesses. Yeah, yes. And it's preserving craft businesses, but also a craft way of doing that. So it's very true to itself. So I know that there are people who are listening in who are thinking, gosh, I probably need to start thinking of my succession plan and my options, but there's a lot to think about. So I want to ask this question to both of you, starting with Ari. What is your advice for starting to think about succession planning?
Well, it's externalized advice, but everybody says you can't start too early. So it's probably a good idea. I think, to Natalie's point, I mean, every situation is different. And part of what I liked about the way that this can work is that it can be designed for each business or each organization's approach to life and efforts to create something that fits its own values and its own vision. Ariana, well, and Natalie knows now from having worked with us. I mean, we start everything with a vision. So there actually is a vision that was written for that we wrote for the Perpetual Purpose Trust. So having vision of where you're going is very powerful. And a lot of people don't quite think about it. And I understand that, but you can write a vision for long after you're there. And not to try to lock in the future in every level of detail, because I think in my mind, we want to leave people who are in the future to design their own future. But if you have a sense of what it's like, what your relationship with the business is like, if you've left the business, et cetera, you can write a vision like that. So I've seen people write visions for post-retirement, how the company's going, how they relate to the company, et cetera, et cetera. So having some sense of vision, documented, shared, and actively bought into certainly makes a huge difference. Governance is a second thing. So I think, Natalie, I mean, we were a little bit of an aberration because we had this long-standing governance model that had nothing to do with this. I would say, not saying this judgmentally at all, but most businesses, including most businesses owned by good friends of mine, are still kind of run like monarchies. It's not the end of the world, but it's still sort of king and queen, or king or queen, or whatever royal figure. So ultimately, even if people delegate a lot and involve people more extensively through the organization, still the ultimate decision-making power and the legal ownership is still held very tightly by, in quotes, the royal family. And I'm not judging that. It just makes it harder for succession. So if you have a kid that's going to take over, then that model can work, I guess. But we didn't have that. We never wanted that. That was never our intention. So in a good way, for us, it's 30 years this year is the anniversary of starting to run our organization by consensus of our partners group, which in the beginning, I think Maggie's on this, was Maggie, I think 6, 7, 8 people. We were meeting in Maggie's living room at her house on Cambridge Street in Burns Park, if I remember right. Now it's, I think, 21 or 22 people, including 4 staff partners, et cetera. But because we're making decisions by consensus of that group, it's really long since passed me or Paul having to be present for a decision to be made. So I hope I'm to be here for quite a while still, but if we were to have, as I always said, if the Martians were come and get us one day and we were gone, the group still knew what to do. The procedure for decision-making at this organization level still applied. So those two things, vision and governance, are big pieces of this that don't need to wait until the actual trust itself is completed. And then I think it's implicit, but having values documented, in our case also now the beliefs are documented, makes it easier too, because you're not just coming up with some construct that's floating out in space. It needs to be created, built, designed, et cetera, around the values, the vision, the mission, and the governance.
And Maggie confirms that, yes, 7 or 8 people in that original Zingerman's Partners group. Thank you, Maggie. Natalie, I also want to pose the same question to you of what is some of your advice for getting started? What are some of the things folks can think about?
Yeah. Well, 100% want to back up what Ari's saying around an owner starting to think about the multiple hats that they wear and succession planning for those multiple hats. So there's your day-to-day leadership hat and there's your ownership hat, and thinking about both and what you're doing to cultivate the next generation of leaders in your business, and then also thinking simultaneously about your succession plan as a shareholder. And in terms of cultivating the next generation, I mean, that work of documenting how you've operated that's made you successful, that secret sauce of your business, of how you behave, how you treat your customers, how you treat each other, how you show up in the world, what your quality, and value commitments are, and writing that down. And you can write it down operationally in ways that you can build it into your human system. So, from how you orient people when they join your business and train, to how you evaluate people's performance over time. Are they not just, getting this out on time, but they're doing it in a way where they're living your values and demonstrating those. Then when it comes to ownership and one of these purpose trusts, we can actually say these commitments are going into the trust agreement that the future trust stewardship committee, which ensures governance over time, ensures that the leaders are leading the company with these values intact, and that we're seeing evidence that these values are still being carried forward. So you're actually embedding it in multiple levels of the organization there, from across your human systems and even in your ownership structure. So articulating what those things are and and kind of training and promoting and rewarding around those things is how you get people who step up into those leadership roles carrying those values that aren't necessarily your kids, but they're your values kids, I guess you'd say, right? And they're bringing their own stuff to it too. The other thing I would say is start talking about ownership succession planning. I think some people are a little bit hesitant to talk about ownership. It's that thing in the background, who owns the company and what do they do? But employees start to get a little anxious when they see founders like getting older, maybe you want to retire someday, what's your plan? So I actually think it can be very motivating to say, hey guys, open book, I'm considering my succession options and I'm looking into these things, and be clear about what the options are you're looking into and what you're committed to in any sort of option. So for example, if it's important to you that the business will stay local, continue to operate with a certain amount of things, say, I'm looking into options that will do these things, and engage people in the process. So we found it to be very successful sometimes when businesses actually get the next generation of leaders to help them design what the future ownership plan will be, because they'll have to execute it together with the founders and carry it on past the founders. So I think starting to talk about ownership early in an open way and engage people in what the plan is important.
So a follow-up, yeah, Ari, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna, thank you, Natalie. I didn't mention, but so early on in this, I started to look at succession and again, I don't know if this is right, it's just how I was framing it mentally, in 3 broad categories. In no particular order, one is the governance succession, which we talked about. Another is cultural succession. It's kind of implicit in what Natalie was bringing up. And then the third is the legal or / financial succession. And they're really 3 different things that certainly overlap. We were fortunate here because, like I said, we had the governance succession, whether we called it succession or not, there was a systemic approach to it that involved more than me and Paul for many years. Cultural succession, one never knows, but I feel like the way that we work with all the open meetings and the classes and not thinking hierarchically and staff partners and a million things that are good for other webinars or that I write about or in the Zing Train seminars, those all have enhanced the likelihood that we can have positive cultural succession. I really, I don't know that I'm right, but I feel like there's literally hundreds of people in the organization who could like I could walk tomorrow and they could step into that role. And would they do it the same? No, of course not. But I think they could do it and do it well, including you, Ariana. And then the third was the one that we didn't have the answer to, which is the legal and financial succession. And that was where, with Natalie's help, putting the Perpetual Purpose Trust in place has been a huge plus for us.
And then, thank you. I really like having those 3 different options, because I think owners, as far as I've seen, you don't go into it saying like, oh, I really want to have these 3 different structures and think about all of this. You just show up today to work and do the work. So I think it's really helpful to kind of like divide out those different areas.
Mm-hmm.
What was the reaction like from staff at Zingerman's? Because Natalie set us up for, it could feel a little scary to share.
Well, Ariana, you could speak to it probably better than me because I'm not staff, but I think here, and Natalie will have experience in other places where this is probably was probably very different. Here, because we have open meetings, because we have open book, because we have been using this governance model for so long, there really was no day-to-day change in the way the organization worked that would be immediately noticeable to anybody. And I think that's good. It made it way easier. I mean, the only tangible difference was that people who own what we call a community share, which is a whole nother conversation, but like Ariana and I each own one community share. It's all you can own. It's like a co-op. So for those people, they're going to get a little extra money every year now because of this, and that little extra will grow over time until over 50% of the intellectual property, or in the business school, the brand, will be owned by the community share. So from an employee standpoint, it's like, awesome, I just get more money. There's, and it's not that much money that they're going to change their life overnight. It's just a little bit more at a particular point in the year. So for us, I think the transition was much more, as I've described it, like flowing from one river into another. It wasn't like tear down this building and build a new one and move everybody into the new one. I know people who are doing this where it's a lot different or more significant change because the whole governance of the organization needs to change as part of it. But for us, I think, I don't know, Ariana, you could comment as well as I can, but I think it's really been relatively fluid.
Yeah, and I think that folks have had a lot of questions, but because we are familiar with what Partners Group is and conversations that come up, community shares, all of these details, it made sense. And just the way you talk about it with like, Zingerman's continuing. I think that's what they just want to know. And I just want to know, will Zingerman's continue to be Zingerman's? And when we can see all of these details that say yes, I think that is the relief, is like, yes, we're working towards something that will continue on into the future.
Yep. Awesome.
And Natalie, what have you seen with reactions from staff or community?
Yeah, well, I think definitely positive along the lines of what Ari was saying. One thing that sticks out in my mind is I remember a warehouser in a business, we did this whole presentation on the change of ownership to have the business be self-owned by a trust moving forward and to share the profits with the employees and stakeholders as we go. And they said, well, I get it. We really are owned by the mission, is what he said. He said, you know, a lot of people, they say, oh, you work for the mission, but you really work for the man. You work for somebody else. Yeah, and that's, the company is their property, and they can choose to cash in on it when they want, and they can take out of it what they want. And they might treat it as a steward, where they don't just use it as a piggy bank to take tons of cash out, and they don't just think about selling it to the highest bidder. They might really think about it in a stewardship way. But who will replace them? And so I think what this guy was saying is, hey, a lot of people say you work for the mission, but you really work for somebody else. And who will that next somebody else be? And will they keep the jobs here? And will they keep the culture here? And will they keep everything? We're actually making a plan where we're actually going to have the company self-owned by and for its mission over time. And as I come to work every day, I'm working for that mission, not somebody else, and I get to share in the return. So he saw it as a kind of putting your structure where your mouth is, or your money where your mouth is. To say, a lot of people say you work for this, but you know, you work for somebody else. We actually do work for this here, and we actually get to share as we go. So, you know, I see a lot of that. And the continuity thing is important for a lot of people. A lot of people want to work someplace where they believe in what they're doing, and the disruption that can be caused. And maybe you find a great aligned buyer the first time, but then what about the next buyer and the next buyer? And so people get anxious about how that might change the future. So I think it, you know, the security of continuity, sharing the rewards as you go, and knowing that you really do work for the mission.
Very inspiring. We do also have some really awesome questions, so I will ask them to both of you. The first one for Natalie. Molly asked, does this information, this perpetual purpose trusts or employee, how does it apply to nonprofits as well as for-profit organizations?
Yeah, so no, and we're talking about, I mean, nonprofits can exist where they exist for a charitable purpose, right, to fulfill, and they carry it out through their operations, whether they get donations for those operations or they can actually sell products and services and reinvest that money back into the charitable purpose. But in a nonprofit, technically, the employees that are working there or investors or others can't share in the profits. It's supposed to 100% go back towards a charitable cause. We've actually had a few nonprofits talk to us about reincorporating as a for-profit, but under a purpose trust. For example, one I talked to, they were working in the recycling industry, and they started off as a nonprofit to create the infrastructure for recycling, but they decided, you know, we'd like to reward our employees working here over time and so forth, but we want to keep to this mission. So they were actually looking at putting those in a for-profit operation, but ensuring that the company would say self-owned. Nobody could cash in and sell it to some larger recycling company, you know, who, and sharing as they go. So it is, the Perpetual Purpose Trust can be a shareholder in a for-profit, not a nonprofit, but it's a way of locking in a for-profit, staying self-owned, mission-driven, and sharing the rewards and governance with people you designate. Those are some examples. I saw another question in the chat about, you know, how do employees get paid when they leave, or can they cash in? These models are really built to kind of share as you go. So again, it's not about kind of leaving and cashing in stock. You don't actually hold stock. The trust holds the stock, the company self-owned. So you share in profits as you go, but that doesn't stop people from building plans with the profits to create long-term savings. So we've seen some companies, rather than put it all towards profit sharing, they'll put it towards retirement plans, 401ks, other vehicles that can grow value. So there are ways to have something that somebody is gaining over time, that maybe they have vesting based on a number of years, almost mimicking some of the aspects of stockholding, but not actually having direct stock ownership in the company itself.
On the other scale of things, what if you have a really small business? So Heather asks, if you have, say, 10 employees and you set it up, what happens if the employees were to leave, or what happens when you actually like need that capital and there's no owner to kind of fill up the capital bucket?
Yeah, well, changing the ownership structure doesn't mean that you don't have to run a great business. So you still have to run a great business and keep the business operating, make sure you have positive cash flows. And as we do these structures, we actually really encourage folks to think about what they need from a capitalization standpoint, and to make sure that they can get money from a bank over time to cover their expenses. And if not, some companies do structure relationships where they do have ongoing investors alongside a purpose trust to provide working capital for the business or growth capital. And that can be done where you can put a trust in place to ensure the company is never sold and keeps the company committed to the purpose. And the shares held by the trust, the profits go to benefit your employees or others. But alongside the trust, you can have investors in stock that can gain in a portion of the profits. You just have to make sure that their return on investment isn't predicated on the sale of the company someday, because that would be at odds with the trust. So it's you want to sharing as you go model with the returns that are made through the company to both your investors and your employees. So you got to think through capitalization and giving the company the financial resources to operate and running a good business in addition to this.
I think the next question switches over to the governance leadership side. So Emily asks, how do big decisions get made?
Well, that's something everybody can every organization can decide for itself what they want to use. And Zing Train in the Leading with Zing seminar teaches some of the different models. But like I said, here, we've been using a consensus model for decision-making at the partner level for 30 years. So that can mean our partners group, which is all the managing partners plus me, and until Paul pulled back, Paul. And then as of 8 years ago, first 3 and now 4, what we call staff partners. It's another conversation, but they serve 2-year terms. But it's by consensus. So I'll be voting next November, don't worry, but this is the opposite of voting. So instead of there's 21 of us, so 11 say yay and 10 say nay, and then that's the end of it. What we do is stay in conversation, as awkward as it may be, until we come out of it with a positive outcome. And it's a whole nother talk, but I know there's a lot of negative beliefs about consensus, and it can be certainly used poorly, but we seem to have made it work. And for clarity, we did manage through the entire pandemic by consensus of that group and came out the other side. Then we also use consensus within each business at the partner level too. There's no right or wrong. I mean, you can use voting, you can do this and still have one person in charge. For us, we've separated, in essence, I'm saying it's more black and white than it is in practice, but separated the governance of the organization from the decision-making within the brand. So when we decide to do some license work, Ariana happens to be on the board with me, where we make those decisions. But there's 5 of us that are on there right now, including Ariana and Roger Bowser who's one of the partners at the Deli. So, but that board only makes decisions about the use of the name. It doesn't make decisions about the price of coffee or which chocolate bar to carry at the candy store or that sort of thing.
The other question too is, Ari, you're still in the organization.
Yeah.
What is the role and contribution of a founder as they're in the organization to stepping away from the business?
Well, Natalie, again, can speak to more broadly to what possibilities are. But as I took this, you can kind of, like she said, it's bespoke. That was a little throw out to the UK folks, but anyway, in a good way, but it can be tailored to what you want to do. So Paul and I continue to get our salaries. I can't remember exactly how many years, but for a while, so that we can feel confident that as long as the organization, to Natalie's point, remains well run, that we will continue to get paid and have some money to live on. But over time, then we're essentially, I mean, in practice, it's buying it out, but we're not getting bought out at the price we would get if we were to have sold it to a third party who might pay a lot of money for the Zingerman's name so they could open Zingerman's all over the country. This is a way for us to continue to have an income and feel some level of confidence that we won't be looking for a job at the age of 85 and have that income. So that's how we've tailored it. So I know Sharon had asked about that. I think it can be designed in whatever way, Natalie can chime in, knows better than I do, but can be designed in whatever way is sustainable for the organization and sustainable for you as the founder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, not much to add. It can be, you're still actively involved in leadership and governance when you make the change. You're starting to pull back from leadership. You're ready to pull back from both leadership and governance. It really depends on the stage a founder's at.
I mean, when the article started to come out in a good way, like I've had quite a few customers go like, I heard you retired. I'm like, no, none of that's changed. I'm still doing exactly what I was doing before. What this is doing is getting out front of how the succession will work. And that the biggest piece of it is that it keeps, as Natalie said, it keeps the organization from being sold. And it allows, to Ariana's point, that people can feel confidence that 20, 30, 40 years from now, if we run the organization well, me and Paul, it's unlikely we'll still be on the planet, but other people will be, and that Zingerman's won't have ended up being run by some multinational in whatever, the Middle East or Manhattan Beach in California. It can still be based here. Nothing against any of those three places, but they're not Ann Arbor.
Well, I'll add that there's a term that's been coined in Europe that is being used for these types of ownership model where the businesses are self-governed and sharing the rewards with people who are active in the business versus kind of absentee folks, and that they are perpetually independent. It's called stewardship ownership. So it's a different way of thinking about ownership, that you're passing it on to people who are steward the business moving forward. They share in the rewards, and nobody can sell the business off as their own commodity. I see a bunch of questions in the chat about kind of financing. There's a lot of technical stuff there, but yes, businesses that are owned by a trust can take on debt so long as the business can prove to the bank that it has the collateral or the capacity, revenue-wise, to pay back the debt. So we found that banks look at businesses the same as they do when they're owned by people, when they're owned by a trust, in terms of what is the business's capacity and track record to pay it back. Sometimes you do have to transfer some of the guarantees from individuals to the business, and there can be a little bit of complexity there. And as I said, you can also have investors participate in these models so long as money doesn't equal power. It's, again, about stewardship of the enterprise, and money can participate and have economic rewards and guaranteed mechanisms to pay investors back over time, but it's not about selling the business over time. Similarly, I want to say, some people think you have to just donate your business into one of these trusts. Patagonia has now famously donated their business into the trust a bunch and are donated the business, but in most circumstances, founders have invested significant resources of their own funds, a lot of sweat equity over the years. They need a nest egg out for retirement. So basically, the owners just take on an agreement to have the business buy back their stock over time in many cases. So the business will say, we will buy your ownership stake out at X value over 10 years, over 15 years. And we just model out the business's capacity to pay out the owners based on its cash flows. Sometimes we can even take on third-party financing to borrow some money to get a first chunk of ownership out and then pay the rest over time. So just wanted to address a few of those financing questions in the chat.
And I know there are a lot more questions. So one, which I believe you can answer very quickly, Natalie, is there a list of companies that have become perpetual purpose trusts?
Yes. We've been working with a researcher at the University of Texas, and we have a list of companies that are owned by Purpose Trust now in the United States, or Employee Ownership Trust is another name for them. As well as we've created a list of service providers, consultants, lawyers, funders who are actively working with businesses on Purpose Trust. So I can share those out. And I also shared with Ariana a link to an international organization for stewardship ownership that promotes these models. Obviously, the legal form is slightly different in Europe and different jurisdictions than it is in the United States, but it's this philosophy around stewardship ownership and how you design a business structure to do so. Got some links there.
And yes, so where else can people go to if they just want to like learn more for themselves?
Well, certainly I'll send out this toolkit on steward ownership. And my website has some resources. I work with business owners to design these structures, and I can certainly route them to also, we have a growing list of people who are doing these trusts who have the capacity to do these. So kind of direct people to somebody in their area who might be available to help.
Awesome. And Ari, we can get your email too, but would you be willing to answer questions if folks would like to reach out?
Yeah, no, absolutely. To John's question very quickly, John, Paul and I, we have ownership in the businesses and ownership of the brand. So we've had to separate, in order to do this, we've separated those two. But again, that's, to Natalie's point, it's like a bespoke, a customized application to each business's approach.
All right. Thank you two. Any final words from either of you to share on this topic? It is really inspiring. So I'd like to end on that. What are some of your final thoughts?
Well, I'm seeing this as the wave of the future. There's 12 million businesses, small and medium-sized businesses in the United States that are still privately held that, according to surveys, will be turning over in the next 5 to 10 years. So they can, shut down, or they can look at selling. And I'm hoping that a bunch of those businesses will choose this path of steward ownership. I think that it can have a lot of positive results for using business as a force for good, and kind of capitalism 2.0, where we have wealth broadly shared and businesses operating in a responsible way. So I'm hoping that this can be a solution that is more widely adopted, and more advisors can help companies do this.
Thank you.
I'll just appreciate Natalie, who was awesome to work with. And I appreciate Ariana, who's been part of this from the beginning as a participant in the organization, and an active one at that. So it's been great. I agree with Natalie. As I said, when this conversation started here, we didn't know anything about it. Like a lot of the people Natalie just referenced in those surveys, when we started, whatever, like succession was not at issue. But I think this is, for me, it may not be for everybody, but this approach is really great for us because it allows Zingermans to stay in our community, which is a really big piece of what's been an important component of our work for all these years. Tomorrow's e-news is about nonconformance, and this is a conforming model in that it doesn't fit with what 99.9% of people have done. But it references the artist Ben Shahn, who wrote about nonconformity, and he said what I think is true, which is that greatness comes from nonconformity. You can go along much more easily by following the plans that everybody else has used, but they don't achieve meaningful greatness in this way. And I'm deeply appreciative to Paul and to Ron Maurer here, and Gary Bruder, our attorney, and Natalie, and just everybody in the organization that's helped to create this. It's highly imperfect. There will be problems. There's always problems. But I think that we've created something that hopefully, as Natalie said, will be of help to other people around the country and hopefully even around the planet. And it is, as Tim Redmond said, thank you, Tim. It's a much nicer way to do it. And metaphorically, as I've been writing about, the typical model is that you start the forest as owners, you plant trees, then you do it for 30, 20, 30, 40 years, then you clear cut the forest because you're done. You take the money and move somewhere, if, in our case, warmer, where there's not ice storms like this morning, and you're done. And it goes off and gets passed to some big company. And this is a way instead to create what I look at as an old growth forest. And you don't have to do a ton of research on forest to understand that the impact of an old growth forest on its ecosystem is radically bigger than merely the number of trees that it could be replaced by in a new forest. So that's really what this is about.
Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Ari. Thank you all so much for being here, for answering your questions. Yes, we will absolutely share the recording. It will be on our website. It will also be in the follow-up email, and we really appreciate you all joining us today. If your question went unanswered, we'll get back to you and we'll try and connect you with some answers. But yes, thank you, Katie, in the background for helping us with questions, but Ari and Natalie for having these conversations. I know that it's been so much time, but thank you from my side, for preserving Zingerman's, for that feeling that I know that I'm working towards something that will continue to go, but also Natalie, for all the other organizations that you're bringing in and sharing these creative ideas for working with purpose. For those of you listening in, we would love to hear what you thought of today's conversation. If you have thoughts for future webinars, please let us know. Katie's going to put a link to a survey into the chat there that you can fill out. And then the follow-up email will come soon. And we look forward to continuing the conversation. So please let us know. And Natalie and Ari, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. It's been such a pleasure. And everyone, have a wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all. Really appreciate it.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.